Good afternoon. Thanks to everybody for coming. We're starting our sixth and final webinar of this series on the frameworks on inquiry. And our subject today is inquiry in social studies in grades K to 5. My name is Steve Armstrong. I'm the social studies consultant for the State Department of Ed. And our other two presenters today are Mary Hanna from the New Canaan Public Schools and Melanie Meehan from the Simsbury Public Schools. And I know they've got a lot to share with you today, so Melanie and Mary, it's all yours. Take it away.
Great. Thank you, Steve. If you just help us advance to the next slide. Welcome, everyone. Our objectives are pretty straightforward. We hope that you'll leave today with a deeper understanding of the inquiry arc and what it might look like and sound like in your elementary school classroom. And we also hope that we leave you with some resources that might help you better balance the content and skills of social studies along with language arts. Next slide, please. This is just the order of what we hope to accomplish today. And Melanie and I will go through the dimensions pretty much in order as we review the arc, but we really understand that there's a lot of overlap and it's a recursive cycle. So there's some complexity in all of this, and we hope that as we go through that you're also grappling and wrestling with just how to make this happen in your classroom. We know that in inquiry there's many questions, and one of them is, how do I balance my time schedule? How do we balance language arts and social studies needs? How much inquiry is enough? How much do we surrender control to the students? These are some of the questions that we're hoping to grapple with you as we go through this webinar. So feel free to use the chat button at any point and send us your questions, your comments, and we'll be checking that as we go forward in the webinar. I'm going to hand it over to Melanie now. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Melanie, you're going to need to, there we go.
Yeah, I needed to just unmute. So just to go over the 4 dimensions of this E3, and we've had webinars on each of these dimensions, so any additional information on any of this is available on the website, going through and finding those links. But the first dimension is really about getting students to ask questions and plan their inquiries. The second dimension is helping those students find the answers to those kinds of inquiries using the disciplinary concepts. When we talk about those, we're talking about the disciplines within social studies of geography, history, civics, and economics. So really thinking in terms of those disciplines to find the answers to those questions. Then there's a lot of overlap between that second dimension and the third dimension. Yep.
Your voice just came in, so could you start again with the 4 dimensions? Because you were muted out for some reason.
So starting again with the 4 dimensions, great, I get a second try at this. When we think about the 4 dimensions, we've actually done a fair amount of work around each of those dimensions through webinars. Those are available to you within the Social Studies website. But the first dimension is really all about asking questions and planning inquiries on the part of the students. So there's a lot of instruction that is involved with getting students to ask meaningful questions and plan those inquiries. As we move into the second dimension, it's really important to think about social studies as far as the disciplines are concerned. So we think about social studies in terms of geography, history, civics, economics. That's really helpful for students in terms of organizing their thinking and planning that inquiry and finding the information to those questions. Between the second and third dimension, there's a whole lot of overlap as students evaluate sources and integrate their information and think about how they're going to use that evidence. We'll spend some time talking about that. before we really get into talking about that fourth dimension, that really critical, important dimension of communicating conclusions and taking informed action. Next slide, please. So thinking about that first question, at this point, we've done a fair amount of work at thinking about how to get students asking questions and planning inquiries. If you ever want more information about this, there's a lot that exists within the webinar we gave about Dimension 1. But just to give a quick overview, there's some important techniques that we've gone through about how to teach students to ask questions. One of those is the question formulation technique. I've given just a quick snippet of how to work that question formulation technique in the gray slide on the right. You have the steps for that. Basically what you're doing is you're getting kids to ask a lot of questions without any judgment before you then nudge them in the direction of improving, prioritizing, and categorizing those questions. That's a technique that works from really very young students all the way through high school and adult. Another technique that I've used really successfully with students involves getting them to ask 5 questions, and that feels pretty easy. If we're looking at this picture on the right, it's pretty easy to generate 5 questions. What gets harder is digging in and getting them to ask 5 more questions about just one of those questions. So pick one question, dig in, ask 5 more. Again, we've given a lot of information about how to use these techniques within other webinars, specifically the webinar about Dimension 1. I recommend going and seeing those in action. And I know Mary has some other ideas about visible thinking techniques, and she's going to talk more about those in the next 2 or 3 slides. The skills that I really think need to be emphasized for students involve how to determine the difference between open-ended and closed-ended questions and how to really balance those when they're doing research. There's places for open-ended questions and there's places for closed-ended questions. That's a really important differentiation for students to learn to make. They also need to learn how to differentiate between researchable questions and non-researchable questions. I had a student who wanted to have his research report be like, what is art? And we had to have a pretty significant conversation to him about how difficult that would be as far as a researchable question and how we could really narrow that down to be something that was manageable for him. The prioritizing and categorizing, that's so important, and it fits right into all of the Common Core writing standards where students are really asked to create organizational structures for how they present information. So all of this really gives you amazing opportunities for getting students to do the kind of work in questioning and categorizing and prioritizing that they need to be successful with those standards. So next slide, please.
I'm going to go over just a few different ways that might be new to you or might expand your toolkit a bit in helping kids to be able to question. Helping students to develop the skill to create questions obviously can take many different forms. We've found that the routines from Making Thinking Visible, that's part of Harvard's Project Zero, can be great ways to generate questions in an inquiry, whether it's a larger research project or research inquiry or just for a lesson. They're especially effective as they can be used across subject areas. They also can be useful as you help students build the capacity for routinely asking questions in their daily work. In this way, questions aren't just relegated to a research project. Young students, as we all know, have many questions. We need to honor those and help them see that this is an important habit. The circle points featuring on the slide is one routine that helps students push into issue as they think about multiple perspectives. That matters. It also does well with core standards. This is when examining an issue over our town could actually use a classroom following research at recess. Next slide, please. A couple of more routines that were, you may be familiar on the low See, Think, Wonder routine for maps, images, or groups. I saw a variation of this. I hear, I wonder, which is even a video or listen to a partner conversation. Teachers in our district often start a unit with a series of images and have students use the See, Think, Wonder. They will return to them their charts of See, Think, Wonder and the images as they continue to learn about the unit and make sense of that text source collection. Students can also compare two texts to maps, an image and map, primary source and a secondary source, and compare using a modification of the strategy. Our students that were at Connecticut were especially intrigued. As you can see, there's a photo of a ladder and what that might mean, and just a photo from the Connecticut River that may be something we don't see every day can really launch into questioning with our younger students. Next slide, please. So the chart on the left, these are not visible thinking strategies per se. The chart on the left is a twist on the KWL. And really, instead of just what I know, as we know that students sometimes have misinformation, we still can honor what they think they know, and it helps students understand that we can change our thinking and that sometimes we do have those misconceptions or incorrect information. It also helps us honor the prior learning of content, but stretches our students to wonder and create questions for new learning. Melanie mentioned before the question formulation technique, which we call the QFT, is also a great way for students to generate questions. Both of these techniques are great ways to launch a unit or just stage an essential question or a topic of study. With guided and shared inquiry, even our younger students have a hand in contributing questions that they'll explore. Visible thinking, as well as the QFT, have that question sort component to them. Visible thinking actually has a routine that's called the question sort that's really useful as classes and groups and students prioritize those questions to research. And the chart on the right that I'm featuring just shows some questions that a 5th grade class chose after doing the QFT. Next slide, please. This is a slide that I was reintroduced to a blog this week that originated in Edutopia. It's pretty straightforward, but when we were thinking about questioning, you know, sometimes we get very complex with a routine, and sometimes it's just a little tweak to help students probe deeper with questions. And what came to me as I was reading through this is just the wait time that sometimes makes a difference. You know, I was thinking, how often do we stop at question number 1? We ask students, what do you think? And we don't always probe deeper. How often do we do number 5 and say, what questions do you still have? And just leave it at that and don't really explore those questions. So no specific answer, just raising some more questions as you, again, grapple with us about inquiry. Next slide, please.
You know, so this is really designed as a stop and pause slide, to wonder what are the pros of having students really doing the work around questioning and what are the cons? You know, we talk about this as being a super way to establish our curriculum, but it's hard, and we want to really give some time to think about what is good about it, but also what is hard about it and what makes it not work. So this is a slide where we really envision stopping and pausing and hearing from you as to what you see are going to be the pros, what you see are going to be the cons about really using student engagement for building the work that happens in classrooms, or using student questioning to build the work that happens in classrooms. So we want to Go ahead.
Melanie, as they're writing in, I noticed that one of our participants had a question about what all of this looks like in kindergarten. I thought I might, again, advocate some of the visible thinking. If you go to their website, they actually give videos of many of their routines used in kindergarten. And in my work in professional development with kindergarten and first grade teachers, we've really analyzed some of those. They've been very, very helpful. I don't know if you have anything that you might want to add, Melanie.
We've done a lot of work in kindergarten around what it means to be a citizen. We do a citizenship unit, and they're able to really work through the inquiry cycle. We have resources that are written at their level about citizenship, and students explore those concepts. They generate a fair amount of questions about what does it mean to behave in school. They get to that. And then they work on answering that, and they then, as part of Dimension 4, which we'll get to, create signs and rules about their expectations for how people should behave. So, that is one of our units within our social studies. I don't know that we're going to get a whole lot written in here. And so, Steve, I'm wondering, I had this problem the last time of not being able to see the chat. Do we have the answers coming in?
If you want to proceed, go ahead. But could I ask a question first?
Sure.
So your point is you can do the questioning at the kindergarten level. So
Absolutely.
You have no doubt about that.
No doubt. In some ways, and there's a lot of research to show it, students before they get to second or third grade are better question askers than students once they get to third grade. There's a fair amount of research that K2 students have much more curiosity and a much greater ability to generate questions.
We had, if I can just jump in briefly, we actually had some kindergarten teachers that developed some inquiry bags where they would put an object or a photo or something that would come out, and the kids would generate questions right from that object or that photo, either in small groups or whatever, but it became part of their daily routine, and the students were so intrigued about what was going to come out of that bag that might pertain to social studies or even science or language arts. So a lot of fun things that you can do with kindergarten.
And could I remind everybody that if you want to see what a kindergarten inquiry looks like, or a grade 1 inquiry, or any inquiry, go to the C3 teacher site, c3teachers.org, and click on the inquiries, and you can see inquiries from any and every grade.
It's a great resource. So,
want to continue on?
Yeah, I just want to talk for a second about the pros and cons. Again, I don't know that we're going to have a whole lot of typing in that goes on, but from a pro standpoint, there's a lot of engagement that happens, which is huge. When students are engaged, they're learning, and that's a hugely important element of this inquiry process. I would guess that the cons are going to center on where do we find the sources, what if they ask questions we can't answer, what if there is information that comes up and I don't know it, and those are some of the cons that we really want to make sure that we address, because those kinds of issues do make this work hard. Next slide, please. Again, anticipating that there's some questions about where we find sources, we've created a slide where we have listed some of the sources that we use that are available. From a free resources standpoint, you have a list up in that upper left corner. Nizella is a fabulous resource. You do have to sign in and create a registration for yourself. Once you do that, they provide all sorts of current articles that you can change the Lexile level from anywhere between a 3rd grade to an 8th grade level, and you have a unbelievable amount of resources about social studies oriented topics right there for you. Kids Click Organization is a website that takes you off-site. So while it's been curated by librarians, I would just say that that is a website where it does take you into the open web. I have never gotten myself into any kind of trouble there. They have all been safe places where I've gone. But I would just say that. That's as opposed to factmonster.com, where all of the information that you keep digging in and digging in deeper stays within that site. National Geographic does an amazing job at curating information for students, both about science and social studies. I can't say enough about the resources that exist there. Readworks.org is, again, one where you create your own profile and sign in, but it's free. While it's really aimed at reading, many of the reading articles that exist can be used for developing content within social studies, so it's really worth going there and checking that out. And then finally, I would never discount YouTube as a free source for videos and curiosity building snippets, and also videos that really build content information. My word of warning on that is just preview them first, because you don't always know what's going to be there and what the comments are going to be underneath. The ones that aren't free, the videos and movies, we use Discovery Ed a lot in our district. If you have that, I highly recommend it. I also highly recommend BrainPop. Again, that is paid. It's not free. If your district has it, though, it's really worth digging in because it's an incredible source for building content. Mary, you were going to talk about the primary sources?
Yes, especially as our students get...
Mary, before you start, if anybody that's on also has other sources that you know of, if you could type them into the chat box, that'd be great. Sorry to interrupt you, Mary.
Oh, no problem. You know, we anticipated that finding primary sources and looking for this information might be challenging to some of you, especially as our students go through the grades and they're expected to use primary sources more. I would encourage you to think sort of outside of the box, I guess, and look at your local newspapers. Make a phone call or visit to your town historical society or museum. Those are great places to find just really short snippets of primary sources. We found, getting back to kindergarten and our young learners again, that sending them home on a scavenger hunt to look for evidence and documents that tell about their family's history has been a great way to expose them to primary sources that sometimes we don't think of as being primary sources, but they are. Just a photo album or some family documents can be great teaching tools. And another one with our kids are older is that docsteach.org. It's a curated, somewhat curated site that gives you a plethora of primary sources that are there for the taking or using. Feel free to excerpt them or use an image. It's a great source. We can move on to the next slide, I think. And we're here at Dimension 2. I'm not going to say too much about this slide other than, you know, Dimension 2 really asks us to apply those concepts and tools, and there are unique ways of thinking and organizing knowledge in social studies. So our younger learners might not see things through a political scientist lens, but they might think about their mayor of their town in the lens, or how they as a citizen use this information. Same thing with economists. Even our young students are learning about economics, and maybe it's the lens of looking at a store owner or the decisions that a family has to make about needs and wants and what they're able to buy. Why don't we go on to the next slide, please? Melanie, I think this is you.
Yeah. So one of the ways that you have to think about all of this is that inquiry has to be balanced with giving content knowledge. So while we say, okay, ask questions and find the answers, there's also an element of needing to provide students with some background information and help them know the content and provide scaffolds of information so that they're able to understand within a context what they're studying. So one of the ways that that we've been seeing that being done is through a mini lecture. It's a concept that has been developed by Teachers College in New York, and it goes really hand in glove with the idea of mini lessons within reading and writing workshop. So just as we have those mini lessons in reading and writing workshop where we have a teaching point and we spend about 10 minutes on it, we have a teaching point within a mini lecture and we spend about 10 minutes on that. Now, the idea behind the mini lecture is that it is really carefully planned. It has a very clear purpose that supports student learning, and it's short. The problem with the mini lectures for teachers is that they do have to do research and they do have to design and create those mini lectures. What we really strongly recommend is that we work together, whether it's through districts or between districts, at really creating shared mini lectures that support the work and lessen the load for teachers who are responsible for teaching so many things throughout the day. But there is the concept of mini lectures that I think is really important in elementary classrooms, as there are plenty of students who really don't have any understanding or conceptual awareness of any of the content we're talking about, and we have to be responsible for building that. Next slide, please.
So in a minute, we're going to watch about 4 minutes, 4.5 minutes of an 8-minute video. If you're watching this at a later time, you may want to watch the entire video. For example, if you're in a professional learning or development session. This is a video from Teachers College Reading and Writing Project. It begins with Lucy Calkins speaking and asking about the messy business of holding young students accountable for work in groups. I'm going to ask you to consider these inquiry groups as you watch and consider the accountability. We will also see a few groups working with multiple sources. You and your colleagues might also think about the student use of text and text sets, as well as close reading strategies that you might notice. Another lens as you're watching might be to consider the DOK, or depth of knowledge, as you watch. Differentiation might also be an appropriate line of inquiry for your thinking. The visible thinking routine might be a way for you as a learner, as a teacher learner, to frame your own inquiry with this video. You might think about what you saw, what you noticed, what that made you think, and finally what it might have caused you to wonder. Steve, we can go ahead and start the video, and I'm going to ask you to stop after about 4 minutes and 30 seconds. See if we get the sound here. As he's adjusting the sound, I might encourage you to go to the Reading and Writing Project website. There are quite a few videos that show literacy in action, and as Teachers College has done a lot of work with content, trying to blend that with Readers Workshop and Writers Workshop. There's some great videos that really are helpful.
You know, and again, you know, as Steve is trying to get Lucy to talk, we have done a lot of work in our district using these inquiry centers, using them for different topics, for different units, and they're a wonderfully engaging tool that work really, really well for building students' background information.
I wonder if he has it now. We'll give it another try and see. And
if not, move on. You know what, Steve? I think that maybe what we'll do is just say that link exists in here as we talk about these. Am I muted?
No, you're fine. I think he's still trying to work with the video.
That's as loud as I can get it here, so people will be able to find the link when they actually go to if they go to this.
Yeah, exactly. So let's make a decision to not spend this 4.5 minutes on it, and we'll just talk.
Let's go move ahead. Our apologies.
Yeah. But basically the way the inquiry centers work is we create 4, 5, 6 different centers, all based around a specific topic or unit. You might have the Write Around Center, as we have here, where students would be reading something and then writing around that topic. You would have seen that on the video, and if you have time and you want to go there, that exists for you. You may also have maps, where students are looking hard at maps. There could be a timeline center. There could be an art and architecture center. Next slide, please. You know, just along the lines of the Write Around Center, you could also have a film center. Again, it all depends on how much work you want to put into these centers and how much time you want to spend on them. We've created about 6 to 7 centers per unit, and we spend 1 to 2 weeks on them, where students cycle through those centers, spending time developing and generating questions, building their background knowledge by the connections and the integrations that they make between those centers. Then they actually go back through the centers and see them through the lenses of much more understanding and information of the content that they're studying. It's a really, really powerful way for students to engage in the materials, engage in primary sources, and really do some heavy thinking about what all of this content's about and how it can relate to the questions they have or help them generate more questions. So again, you can find out so much more information about these inquiry centers through that website. And Becky Laus and I are always happy to consult and talk to you about any of these, because they are a fabulous way for engaging students. Next slide, please. You know, certainly one of the really important skills that students learn as thinkers has to do with taking notes and keeping track of the information that they learn. So in the next few slides, we'll be talking about note-taking and keeping track of information, what that means, how that relates to literacy skills for students. Basically, this slide is giving you a sense of how you could teach into the different types of note-taking, what it looks like, what the purpose is, when to use it. This is a slide that I might really work on developing with students in a way like what you will see on the next slide, please. So that slide previous to this was more of a teacher-oriented slide. This is how it looks when it really comes to life in a classroom. So you have your ways to take notes, and it really helps students see the different types of notes and envision the reasons that they might make choices about what sorts of notes they put in their notebook. These are both charts that I would build in front of kids, really co-create with students about what we do as note takers, what we do as far as the process. That's what the chart on the right addresses, and what decisions we make as note takers that will really, really help us remember the information that we're coming across. So again, it's a really, really nice cross movement between the content that you're using, which is your social studies, and the literacy skills that you're putting into place and practicing in order to access that content and remember it and use it. Next slide, please. These are, again, 2 more charts that I have seen. These are charts that were created in 4th grade classrooms. really teaching into how do I take notes and what should my notes look like. So this was a teacher who was really emphasizing exact quotes and paraphrasing. Again, really important skills for students to learn. She was also emphasizing how do you decide what's important. So there are two wonderful charts that I think could exist in a lot of elementary classrooms, thinking 3rd, 4th, 5th, even 6th grade, really important skills for them to know, understand, and be able to use in their own notes and then eventually in the product that they're creating. Next slide, please. And again, along the same theme, I think it's really important for everybody to see that these sorts of teaching points, these teaching charts, lead to really high quality student work. These notebook pages are taken out of a 5th grader's notebooks. Again, while I realize that endangered bears isn't really social studies, I did want to just share the picture of what a student's notes look like when they're making very, very explicit decisions about what notes they're taking and how they're organizing those notes. Students can do this work, and it's really important work for them to learn how to do. Again, these are pages with all of these charts and all of this student work that I might really consider using to teach from in elementary classrooms. These notes could serve as mentor notes for students. The charts could serve as mentor charts for teachers to really work hard at creating those charts in front of and with students. Next slide, please. You know, again, here's a stop and pause slide because I think that at this point, one of the things that gets me really nervous about doing all of this work is what resources might a student use. And I think that this is a place where we can do an inquiry here with participants. If you're using this as professional development, you might consider doing an inquiry with your staff as far as what resources do we have available for students to use. I think it's really worth spending some time thinking about this, saying how can they find these answers, not only from things like Newsela and KidsClick, but also just more globally. How do we find information if we're a student? This is the kind of a chart that I also might think about creating with students. That being said, let's go to the next slide, please. Again, thinking back to the last slide of what resources do I have, we can think about it as adults. We can also present that to students. This left slide, or this left chart, that's a chart that I would, again, create with students. There are a lot of different ways that we can find answers to questions. We can find them with books. We can find them with the computer and digital resources. But some of the things that we don't always think about is the fact that there are experts out there, and how do I contact them? We have other people. You can ask questions of each other and use each other as collaborative resources. And then we also have videos. Videos are something that provide an unbelievable amount of information for your kiddos who struggle to read, but you have to really teach students how to glean information from videos. They need to learn that stop and pause and figure out how to take notes in a meaningful way. Those are all important lessons to work on with students. I think the chart on the right is another really critical chart to work with students and really teach them into it. And this one is one that we're going to refer back to because it really exemplifies and shows the blurriness of the whole inquiry arc and cycle. Like, when we ask questions and we find the answers, we ask more questions. We can sort and sift them and we can integrate the information. But really, as we integrate information and learn more, the really good researchers are constantly going, well, but wait, that didn't go with something else, or, but wait, now I have a better question because I understand something more. And I think that that has to be really made explicit for a student and made okay for students, so that you're working through this whole cycle before you're getting ready to do your important work of reporting out. So that's a slide, that's a chart and a slide that we will refer back to. Next slide, please.
Okay, we're headed into Dimension 3, and as we've been mentioning, Dimension 2 and 3 really go very well together, and there's so much overlapping. It's really very difficult to say one comes before the other. And just as it says, evaluating sources and using evidence, it's really all about how and what sources, which are the appropriate sources, how do I use them, and then how do I use the evidence from all that note-taking. And you can see before that we're asked to have our students really think about that argument. And we realize that the Connecticut core standards talk about opinion and opinion writing. You'll notice the one difference in the C3 and our Connecticut frameworks is the word argument is used throughout the grades as really being one of those historical tools. You know, Dimension 3, again, fits very well with Dimension 2, that, you know, they dovetail well with language arts and the Connecticut standards, and they also honor some of those differences between a language arts and the social studies, and that rigorous analysis of sources being really important. And once again, I just want to reiterate that when you're thinking about sources and having that discussion with your instructional teams, that not to overlook not only the videos, but maps and charts and graphs as being really important sources of information. And even the Common Core really honors the variety of text that a social studies learner can use and glean information from in the inquiry. The next couple of slides, Melanie's going to kick it off and discuss some of the research and types of decisions one needs to make in considering this next dimension.
Right. So the charts that are on the left and the middle are the same chart. It was a chart that was developed with students and in front of students. I think that this chart, and there's a reason we put it next to that research cycle again, it really, really shows the fluidity that exists between dimension not only 2 and 3, but 1, 2, and 3. Because what it's emphasizing is that as you're looking to find questions or find answers to questions, there are some decisions that researchers make that involve adding, deleting, or changing my questions. So that's where you might be in Dimension 3 in that you're evaluating your resources and you're integrating the information, but you might be making decisions that go back to Dimension 1 of asking different questions, or go back to Dimension 2 of finding the information and revisiting some of the sources. So I think that it's just, again, really, really important to emphasize to students and to teachers and to just understand the overlap that exists between the dimensions and the fluidity that should be happening within the classroom as students cycle through the different dimensions. It's a slide that really exemplifies the mess that sometimes happens and makes inquiry hard, but it's also a slide that exemplifies the excitement that happens and the engagement that happens as we find information and make decisions as researchers to wonder more and find out more and figure out different ways to put things together and change the focus. And that's exciting stuff for not only students, but for adult learners too. Next slide, please. Again, these are two more charts that I would really consider highly making with students. One of the goals of this presentation was to leave you with a lot of resources and a lot of tools to use with students. again, the chart on the left was one that my blogging partner, Melanie Swider, made with 5th grade students, and it's really taking students through the steps that they do as researchers and eventually as presenters. So that chart really encompasses the 4 different dimensions of the inquiry arc in a nice way. Sort of a nice anchor chart for giving that process. The chart on the right is a chart that we have created for our library media specialists to work off of, because a really important element of all of this work is having students understand how to find good resources. There are many resources out there that have hidden biases and agendas that, while they might have good information, you as a researcher need to be aware of. And the questions that exist that are bubbled in with that chart really hit at the ideas of whose perspectives are left in, whose perspectives are left out, and what was the purpose of the author for writing this piece or for creating this video or even for creating these maps. There are biases that exist that we as researchers and as consumers of information have to be aware of. One of the things that we as educators have to really understand is that these students have an unbelievable amount of information that's available to them, and they need to be critical consumers of that information. It's our job to teach them. So that's a really important chart for making sure that they are critical consumers of information. Next slide, please.
So we come to dimension 4, communicating conclusions and taking informed action. And I really think that this is one of the more exciting parts of the inquiry arc, but arguably one of the more challenging parts of the arc. Just the act of sharing with others and getting involved in one's community can not only reinforce the content, but there are authentic ways to engage our students in actually being citizens of their class and their school, as well as the greater community at large. The sharing of learning and research and academic conversation, as you know, dovetails well with our Connecticut core listening and speaking standards, as well as the writing standards. This dimension, as you probably are aware, has 2 parts, that communicating conclusions and that taking informed action. The first part may not be new at all to your practice. The C3 in our new framework encourages, however, to think beyond just our classroom audience when we share, and encourage us to help students see a link between what they're learning in their classroom and being a citizen. So this informed action part of the dimension may not be in every unit, but at some point in the year, we want to encourage our students and classes to go beyond just sharing, to think about informed action in their community, however large or small that community might be defined. We're going to share a few ways that teachers have worked with their students on both communicating conclusions from research, and then we're going to take a look at the informed action piece specifically and maybe brainstorm together as I share a few ways that it has worked in our district. So we can go to the next slide.
Yeah, so I really have the slides that have to do with communicating conclusions. Those dovetail really well with any kind of writing workshop that you might have in place. Certainly a chart that you can create with students has to do with how we can present our information in new learning. That information can be informational writing, or it can be opinion or argument writing when you're thinking about the ways that you can communicate conclusions. Again, this is more envisioned within either the school community or the classroom community. It's less of a take it out to the whole world or bigger community. There's times and places to do that, and there's times and places where it is just communicating conclusions within the classroom, and that's okay too. So I think also it's important to say right here that really we want to emphasize the process of all of this and not always the product. Like it's the process of going through these steps and doing the hard work of researchers and communicators of information, that matters a lot more than this incredible product of, you know, a food show or a fashion show or whatever that sometimes happens. That's less important than the thinking and the hard research work that goes on beforehand. So next slide, please. Communicating conclusions lives within writing workshop, and I really want to just take a minute and emphasize that when you are creating an information piece, you are communicating your conclusions. When you're writing an opinion piece, that is communicating your conclusions. You're doing all of this work that leads up to those pieces, and that is one of the ways that you can communicate conclusions. Next slide, please. You can also communicate your conclusions by teaching each other. One of the wonderful things that has happened in our 6th grade social studies class, but it can certainly happen in younger classes, and I've seen it, this picture and this product just happens to come from a 6th grade class, is that students can learn from each other. So while we are reading, we're teaching into reading to learn within that dimension too, we can also teach students that sometimes we write to teach. And that's a really neat concept for students to understand. So the people who created these information books that these students are reading, the students who created those, had a responsibility to have information that was meaningful to their peers, that their peers could take notes on as they read. That was a big deal in that class, and really motivating and engaging and important work for those 6th grade students. Next slide, please.
So we're hoping, you know, Melanie, and my hope is that as you're listening today and working through this with your instructional team, that you're thinking about what this means for your own classroom and your curriculum. I'm going to share just how some teachers in our district have taken this dimension and not only work to guide students to creatively communicate conclusions to various audiences, they've also thought about the informed action piece from the beginning of the unit. Although it's challenging, this can be one of the most exciting parts. Traditionally, we may have concluded a social studies unit with just the sharing, and now we're asked to broaden that a little bit, and that's what these quotes in the C3 really get at, is that civic engagement part. So why don't we go to the next slide, please. This is an example of the inquiry arc, and in particular dimension 4, what it might look like for a group of students who are learning about their town. And you can see the overlap of the dimensions as I tell you briefly about this. While learning about their town, the students zoomed into parks as a way of understanding town functions and how they met the needs or didn't meet the needs of the citizens. And they learned about an issue in town with pop-up parks, and then sought to learn more about that dilemma that the town was facing. The blurb in blue is part of an article that was written in the town newspaper that became their anchor primary source for their inquiry. Students created questions. They researched by asking people in their family and interviewing others to find out information and their opinions. And then they created possible suggestions and solutions to the problem the town was facing. They shared their suggestions with others in the school, thus broadening their audience a bit. And then they were able to actually present their findings, which is the informed action piece, to the president of the Chamber of Commerce in town, who's in charge with, along with a committee, creating the pop-up parks that occur or hopefully occur in the neighborhood each year. So she actually brought what this grade level had decided and brought it to the committee, and everyone's anxiously awaiting the new rollout of what parks might be here for the summer. Next slide, please. Another example of all of this was a grade level that was studying Connecticut, and this was the point in the year that the teachers decided to try to make that informed action connection. So studying Connecticut, they sought to share, obviously, the results of their inquiry, and you can see examples of a couple of bulletin boards there with their brochures. And then they, the students were really realizing that, we don't have welcome centers in Connecticut, or at least down where we are. They're more rest stops. So what does that mean? How do people learn about our state? And if they want to live here, how do they get the appropriate information? So this really spurred students onto another little mini inquiry, which was the informed action piece. And they actually role-played a visitor center and created what they thought would be an ideal visitor center. So although we haven't seen any changes to our state visitor centers, because of the student work, it was a way for them to think about a real life and possible dilemma and to problem solve within the social studies disciplines. Next slide, please. And this is sort of, I guess I'm sharing part of our work in progress. As our grade 5 students move closer to middle school social studies, we really wanted to be sure that we transitioned them well into more of the disciplinary concepts and tools that they will need. And we really took a closer look at our grade 5 revolution unit with the inquiry arc in mind, and realized that some of the ways that students shared their information was not really authentic. For example, they might have created a poster or a diorama or a product that might not be what a student who studies history would do in the real world. We wanted our 5th graders to wrestle with this authenticity and use those disciplinary tools. So as they researched people, this is an inquiry within the unit, they researched people who made a difference in the Revolutionary War. We wanted to give students a choice of these authentic ways. So you can see listed the 4 ways that we came up with to have the kids really share their work, and also pushing to a different DOK or depth of knowledge level while doing so. They really had to take and use their information and justify why this person made a contribution that warranted a museum exhibit or a monument or even a children's book. So we could go to the next slide, please. We took it another step. The teachers really felt that academic conversation was very, very important. And this is the inauthentic part. You'll see some students dressed in costume there. Many of the teachers decided to have a dinner party and have the students actually create questions that could be used at the dinner party. And they asked and answered questions with this perspective of their character. So taking that to another level. But what happened then is, upon reflection, many students said they wanted to know what really happened with the people in our town and our state and our country who made these important contributions. And questions started emerging from the students about how we remember these people. And a quick little survey around town didn't yield too much. We see on the left a plaque of people from the town who fought in the Revolutionary War. There is a cross monument dedicated to people who have fought in the war, and then a neighboring town as a marker of a battle. So it's really the seeds of a future-informed action really came from the kids, these wonderings, and it raises the question that's still lingering and worth exploring. Who decides who is remembered? Who decides what contributions by townspeople should be celebrated and how? How does this tie into the naming of the streets in our town? So as our teachers are becoming more comfortable with the inquiry arc and also this last part of Dimension 4, informed action, it's gotten very exciting. If you or your districts have tried any informed actions, feel free to use the chat box and discuss with us. If you're watching this webinar at a later date, you might want to pause and consider your units and look at the arc of your year and your curriculum thus far. Is there a place where you might try to take this to your community and think about the problem solving that our young citizens can do right there in their, maybe in their school, their town, or wider community? So why don't we go to the next slide, please.
This slide would be a really wonderful place for stopping and doing some of that work of what you envision using in your classroom, both from this whole presentation, what are some of the components that you could take out and really think about using in your classroom, and what are some of the ways that you could change some of what you're already doing so that there is more of an element of the inquiry arc that exists within the content that you're already using. This is a place where I really would recommend stopping and pausing and spending time thinking and grappling and wondering and developing some kind of plans about what you envision using within your classroom.
Great, so we've got one more slide. We can go to the next one. And feel free, if you're listening right now, to continue to add things to the chat box. Our final slide is selected resources. We've already highlighted many of these already, just a few that might be new. Connecticut history is a great one. Melanie mentioned, I believe, C3 Teachers before. They've done quite a lot of work with New York State, so you'll see all of their toolkits up there and many sample inquiries that are ready to be either put inside of one of your pre-existing units or just to give you some great ideas of where your instructional and curricular team can go. Teaching history is a great place, although geared more for middle school and up. There are some wonderful blogs and articles and sections that really help you, especially with the history discipline. There's another website called Teach It Connecticut, which is becoming a compendium of lessons as well based on Connecticut in our state, so I recommend that to you. And the last bullet under sort of the content and lesson inquiries is the Tenement Museum. And I know that's out of our state, but if you think down to New York City, they have a lot on immigration. And I think you'll find some great primary sources and instructional materials for teachers and how to use those primary sources to explore that topic with students. The last bullet is the Edutopia article about inquiry that we referred to before. And I think that pretty much sums up our webinar, and we're grateful that you all could be participants. If there's any other questions, feel free to chime them in, and we thank you all for attending and wish you much success in exploring the inquiry arc with your district.
Mary and Melanie, thank you very much. There was a ton of information in that, and I think people that heard it today and people that hear it in the future will agree there's a lot in there that can inform instruction at the K-5 level. So, folks, thank you for participating today. We're going to have 2 webinar series starting in mid-May that will extend into June. One is on teaching the 2016 elections, and the other one is teaching the Middle East and teaching terrorism. Information on those will be available shortly. But thanks to everyone that's, again, taken part in this webinar series and this webinar today. And Mary and Melanie, thanks again for your for leading this today. Greatly appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good day.
Bye.
Have a great day, everybody. We'll talk again. Take care.